We're recording this in June, a couple of weeks after the European parliamentary elections 2019. In the second podcast of this series, Dionysus spoke about the significance of those elections, and one of them being the widely predicted rise of the far right in those elections. And I'm going to look at whether that predicted rise actually occurred. There were major losses for the main centre-right and centre-left parties in the election, but the gains, the significant gains, were for the Liberal and Green parties rather than for the far right. There were some countries where the far right did well, so in France they did very well, but less well than in 2014. Italy they did well, and a few other countries. But they also did less well than expected in Germany, and very badly in Denmark, the Netherlands, Austria. So overall, depending how you count it, their share of the seat has gone up from about 21% to about 23%, so not actually the surge that was expected. About half of European voters voted left of centre, and 70% voted for parties that were solidly pro-European Union, anti-populist. Is that quarter of the European Parliament on the far right, is that a threat? Can we describe them as fascists? Apart from just one or two MEPs who are not aligned to any of the big groupings in the European Parliament, who are from the fascist right, it's inaccurate to describe the European Parliament's far right as fascist. It's more of an anti-immigrant, nationalist, authoritarian, populist current rather than a fascist current. So what is the nature of the far right in the European Parliament? There's really four groupings, and they're quite different from each other. So going from the mainstream to the edge, we've got the European Conservatives and Reformists, and this is the coalition that was actually started by David Cameron's Conservative Party when he left the mainstream Conservative grouping. And this is a coalition of law and order, religious parties. It includes the Polish PIS, the ruling party. It also includes the new Spanish group Vox, which is an anti-Muslim, anti-feminist group. And some of the groupings in this, the parties in this grouping have a fascist background, but they're much more kind of traditionalist rather than far right. Then there's Farage's group, Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy, and this is an unstable coalition of the Brexit Party and the anti-establishment Italian Five Star Group, and they're struggling to get other allies in Parliament. The group to really watch is the new group set up by the Italian Lega, which is called ID, Identity and Democracy, and this includes France's Marine Le Pen, and this has got about 73 seats, almost a tenth of the European Parliament, and this includes a number of groups that do have a very far right background, but it's also divided between pro-Russian and anti-Russian groupings, for example, and between parties that are more keen to disassociate themselves from the far right. A couple of concluding comments. One is that although the far right in the European Parliament has a significant chunk of the seats, it's a very divided and fragmented group. There's been a lot of efforts to network across the nationalist parties globally as well as in Europe, but there's a number of kind of real sticking points that they have. For example, their stance towards Putin. On the more positive side, we saw in this election a rise in turnout, the highest turnout in many, many years, and in particular young voters turning out in much higher numbers. And this has really contained the rise of the far right. Young voters simply don't vote for far right parties, nor do more educated voters. So the far right's support base is an aging support base. And so I guess that's one reason to be optimistic.